All right, picture this. A huge, bustling film studio in India, back in the 1940s. It's a world of pure drama, big dreams, and, apparently, truckloads of face paint. Now, into this scene walks a very tall, very serious English poet. And his visit leaves absolutely everyone scratching their heads. So let's get right into this truly bizarre story.
And that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, Gemini Studios was making movies for the masses, for people who really didn't have much interest in, complex English poetry. But one day, this guy shows up, gives a speech that nobody can understand, and then just leaves. His visit was a complete puzzle, one that went unsolved for years.
You can just imagine the scene, right? It was pure chaos. The boss of the studio gets up, gives this long introduction, but it's painfully obvious he knows next to nothing about his guest. Then the poet starts to speak. And between his really thick English accent and just how weird the whole situation was, the audience was just dazed and silent, as the book puts it. Even the poet seemed to know how absurd it was, talking about the thrills and travails of an English poet to a room full of Tamil filmmakers.
So how do we crack this case? Well, the clues aren't in England. They're right there, inside the gates of the studio. To figure out why on earth this poet was there, we have to first understand the strange, wonderful, and very complicated world of Gemini Studios itself.
Okay, let's step inside. Founded way back in 1940 by the legend S.S. Vasan, Gemini Studios was a huge deal in early Indian cinema. It was its own little universe, really, a place packed with creativity, ambition, and some pretty intense drama. It was kind of like a mini version of a newly independent India trying to figure itself out. And the heart of it all? Well, it was in a place you would probably never guess.
Yep, the makeup department. And get this, it was housed upstairs in a building they thought had been Robert Clive's stables. The room itself was a sight to behold, all mirrors and these giant incandescent lights. The heat they gave off was so intense, the source calls it a fiery misery for any actor who had to sit in that chair.
And that quote just says it all, doesn't it? See, because of the harsh lights and the old film technology, actors had to be literally caked in layers of pancake makeup. The idea was to close every single pore on their face, which often made them look pretty monstrous up close, just so they'd look kind of normal on camera.
Now, inside this crazy world, you've got this fascinating little drama playing out between two key people. On one side, you have the office boy. And let's be clear, he's not a boy, he's a frustrated artist in his 40s who thinks he's a wasted genius. And on the other side, Kothamangalam Subbu, the clear number 2 man at the studio, and the one person the office boy blamed for all his problems.
So let's talk about Subbu. Because honestly, if you want to get Gemini Studios, you have to get this guy. He wasn't just some manager, he was the creative powerhouse, the problem solver, and totally loyal to the boss. He was, as our author says, completely tailor-made for films.
And here's a perfect example of his genius. A producer would come to him with some totally bonkers scene, like, I don't know, a rat fighting a tigress underwater who then nurses her cubs. And Subbu, without even blinking, would come up with 4 different ways to shoot it. If the producer still wasn't sure, he'd spitball 14 more ideas in a minute. The man was indispensable. But wait, there was more. He was a respected poet, a novelist, a fantastic actor who could steal any scene he was in, and just an incredibly generous person. His house was always full of friends and relatives. He was successful, cheerful, and talented, which, naturally, just made the office boy hate him even more. But this little feud was just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. Okay, this is where things get really interesting, because our first major clue to the mystery poet has nothing to do with art. It's all about politics. You see, the entire studio, from the very top to the bottom, had a very, very strong political opinion. So just about everyone there was a follower of Gandhiji, but their political beliefs had one clear enemy: communism. In their eyes, a communist was a godless man, someone with no loyalty to family who just wanted to stir up violence. This anti-communist feeling was pretty common across South India back then, as the anxieties of the Cold War started to trickle into everyday life, and Gemini Studios was right in the thick of it. Which brings us to 1952. This group of about 200 people, called the Moral Rearmament Army, or MRA, shows up in town, and Gemini Studios rolls out the red carpet. They were a pretty strange bunch, with people from all over the world. So strange that someone hilariously called them an international circus. So what was this MRA all about? Well, it turns out they were basically a counter-movement to international communism. Their plays were pretty simple, but because they had such a clear anti-communist message, the big shots in Madras, including the boss, Mr. Vassan, welcomed them with open arms. And this is key. It set a precedent.
And that precedent, well, it leads us straight to our mystery poet. Just a few months after the MRA packed up and left, the studio cleared the stage for another visitor from overseas. And this is where all the pieces are finally going to click into place.
So let's fast forward a bunch of years. The poet's visit is just this weird, dusty memory. Our author, Asokamitran, finds himself out of a job, with a lot of time on his hands. One day, he's browsing one of those cheap book piles on the sidewalk where everything's like 50 paise, and he picks one up.
The book was called The God That Failed. It was a collection of essays by 6 really famous writers, all about their personal journeys into communism and then their journey out. And as the author is reading the names of the contributors, a little bell starts to ring in his head. One of them was an English poet named Stephen Spender.
And there it is. Bingo. The mystery was solved. The tall, serious, very English poet who had completely baffled the entire staff of Gemini Studios was Stephen Spender. The name finally made sense. Suddenly, the whole bizarre visit clicked. The boss, Mr. Vassan, probably wasn't interested in Spender's poetry at all. He was interested in Spender, the ex-communist. Just like with the MRA, this was a political invitation. Mr. Vassan was showing off another intellectual who had rejected the God that failed. It was this huge, almost comical misunderstanding. The poet thought he was there to talk about poetry, and his host thought he was a political symbol. And that just leaves us with this incredible thought, doesn't it? A massive, global ideological battle, communism versus the West, was being played out not on a battlefield, but on a film set in South India. It involved a frustrated makeup artist, a brilliant director, and a very, very confused English poet. It just goes to show you, sometimes history's biggest moments happen in the places you'd least expect.